There is a moment, often quiet and strangely anticlimactic, when a man finally steps out of a relationship with a narcissist. From the outside, it looks like a simple exit, but inside it feels more like walking out of a reality someone else built for you. Walls painted with charm, doors that only opened inward, and a script that always bent itself around their needs. Many men misinterpret this moment. They think the heaviness they feel is evidence that they've lost something meaningful. But the truth is gentler and harder at the same time. What feels like grief is often decompression from a world that was designed to keep you entangled. If you've been blaming yourself for not leaving sooner, or for leaving and still feeling disoriented, you're not alone. There's a private shame that many men never admit out loud. How did I let this shape me? How did I, a competent adult, get woven so deeply into something that now feels unreal? The answer isn't weakness. It isn't gullibility. It's the way your nervous system, your longing for connection, and your early attachment conditioning collided with someone whose sense of identity depends on control. You brought honesty, empathy, and a desire to repair. They brought a hunger for domination disguised as devotion. When those two forces meet, the bond feels predestined, almost mythic, as if you were chosen rather than conditioned. Jung would say that part of you wasn't relating to a partner at all, but to a figure he called the false king, the archetype of authority without substance, charisma without center. You gave your loyalty to a throne that only stood upright if you doubted yourself. This is one of the illusions men rarely recognize early on, the belief that they were in a relationship between equals. But what you were actually navigating was a psychological monarchy built on shifting rules, where your confusion was the currency that kept the kingdom alive. If you trace the pattern back far enough, you may notice that your hunger for approval didn't start here. It started much earlier, in rooms where your feelings had to shrink so someone else could shine, or where your needs felt like burdens rather than signals of childhood. That wound made you receptive to someone who rewarded you just enough to keep you hoping, and punished you just sharply enough to keep you dependent. It creates a bond that feels cosmic, when in truth it's biochemical and patterned. And when you finally pull away, the shock you feel isn't just heartbreak. It's the dizziness of stepping outside a story you didn't realize was being written for you. What often gets overlooked is what your leaving triggers on the other end. Behind the frost of superiority, behind the deflection and performance, your absence delivers a kind of psychological blow they work tirelessly to avoid. The wound of being abandoned. It's an injury to the identity they've cultivated, a persona that depends on never being the one left behind. Their internal world, though well disguised, is held together by fragile scaffolding. When you step out, a crack runs through that illusion, and even if they never say it, the fracture is real. Think of the relationship as a long-running saga, one where the writer kept revising the plot to keep you from walking off stage. Every emotional twist, every sudden tenderness after a fight, every moment you questioned your sanity, these were not accidents. They were edits, rewrites, adjustments designed to keep you in a position where you needed them more than they needed you. When you leave, you're not just ending a chapter. You're stepping out of the entire genre, picking up the pen, and realizing the story was never truly yours. But here is the quiet truth at the center of this. This isn't a redemption tale about them. It's an X-ray of what actually happens inside their psyche once your presence, their supply, evaporates. And more importantly, it's an exploration of what that reaction reveals about you, your sovereignty, your path back to yourself, your return to an identity that doesn't orbit someone else's emotional weather. If you want, you can treat this introduction as an invitation, not to relive what you've already survived, but to understand the architecture behind it, to see the mechanisms that kept you loyal, the shadows that kept you quiet, and the subtle power that begins to return to you the moment you walk away. And if you stay with me, there's a moment at the midpoint of this exploration where a deeper pattern becomes visible, one most men overlook. It's the pattern that makes the narcissist feel weakest precisely when you're convinced you've lost the most. That realization alone can shift the entire way you see what happened between you. When you're ready, we'll step into what unfolds the moment your absence fractures the illusion they live inside. For a narcissist, being left is not just a breakup. It is a breach in the mythology they've spent a lifetime crafting. Beneath the curated persona, the confidence, the charm, the certainty, lives something far more fragile, a primitive fear, not just of loneliness, but of erasure, the deep, pre-verbal terror that if someone can walk away from them, they might not be real, not special, not irreplaceable. This is where many men misunderstand what's happening on the other side of silence. You imagine they've moved on, found someone else, or never really cared. But often, what your absence creates is not peace for them, it's rupture. A fracture between their self-image and the undeniable reality. You left. The narcissist's first response is rarely introspection. It's repair, not of the bond, but of the illusion. They may hoover, send vague apologies, act as if nothing happened, or reappear with sudden softness. But these aren't reconciliations. They are attempts to reassert control, to pull you back into the frame where they are central, and you are responsive. They don't miss you. They miss what your presence secured, a sense of superiority that depended on you staying small. This is the part many survivors struggle to name. Your confusion, your emotional labor, your second-guessing, it served a function. It kept their identity intact. And now, without it, they are exposed to something intolerable, cognitive dissonance, the gap between who they claim to be and what just happened. If they are exceptional, magnetic, unforgettable, why did you step out? Rather than face this directly, the mind revises the story. They might say you were unstable, that you couldn't handle the intensity, that they ended things. The specifics vary, but the strategy is consistent. Protect the grandiose self at all costs, because beneath that shell is not true confidence. It's the panic of a self built on performance, not substance. This explains a strange contradiction. How they can smear you to others while still reaching out. How they can insult your stability and in the same breath, try to re-establish contact. These aren't mixed signals. They're two competing internal narratives, both trying to win. One says, he's weak and I'm better off. The other says, I still need him to orbit me. It's not rational. It's structural. The entire identity depends on never being the one left behind. There's a moment in this dance that many men miss. A moment where they try to explain, to bring clarity, to offer closure. But explanations are fuel. The narcissist doesn't interpret your words at face value. They interpret them as openings. Your attempt to bring reason is mistaken for interest. And in this system, interest equals control. Silence, on the other hand, is different. It's not a tactic. It's not a punishment. It's the absence of projection material. There's nothing for them to rewrite, reshape, or spin, and that void becomes a mirror. One they cannot distort. In that mirror, they don't see your flaws. They see the space they can't fill. And that is what triggers the wave of manipulation many survivors report. Sudden emergencies, health scares, coincidental run-ins, warmth that seems to appear from nowhere. These aren't genuine reconnections. They're attempts to break the mirror. Some of the signs are subtle. A quiet check on your profile, a mutual friend mentioning your name out of the blue, a nostalgic message that pretends to be casual. These aren't accidents. They are pulses sent out to test the current. Do I still exist inside him? And here is where the deeper mechanism begins to surface. These moments don't just affect them, they affect you. Because your nervous system, still patterned by the trauma bond, may feel those small pings as gravitational, as if you're being pulled back into something you thought you'd outgrown. But attraction, especially in these dynamics, is not always a signal of alignment. It is often a memory of chaos, misread as passion. The pull you feel may not be love. It may be the echo of survival, the feeling of being noticed by the person who once made you feel like you barely existed. And so this is where we pause, not to analyze them further, but to begin turning the lens gently inward, toward the bond itself, toward the way your nervous system was trained to respond, and why your absence doesn't just destabilize them. It reveals the foundation they were always standing on, one built on illusion, dependent on your confusion, and now, increasingly, exposed. What many men still carry, long after the last message is read, after the profile is blocked, after the room feels empty, is the craving, not for the person, but for the pattern. A biochemical loop that has nothing to do with compatibility and everything to do with survival. When you were in it, the relationship didn't always make sense, but it made sensation. The arguments, the reconciliations, the tenderness that followed chaos, Your body learned to respond as if it were being rewarded for enduring. And in a way, it was. Cortisol during conflict. Dopamine when the tension broke. Oxytocin when closeness returned, even briefly. This is not a metaphor. It's the actual chemistry of attachment, distorted by volatility. This is why leaving doesn't feel clean. It feels like withdrawal, because the bond wasn't built on mutual safety. It was built on rupture and relief, on moments where the nervous system said, "If I survive this storm, I might earn the calm." That is not connection. It is conditioning. Many men confuse the ache of absence with the loss of love. But craving is not clarity. It's the nervous system begging for a pattern it learned to tolerate, because it once promised regulation, even in small, distorted doses. The intensity you miss might not be her. It might be the high of being chosen after being discarded, the relief of not being punished, the illusion that chaos meant depth. Here, a quiet reframe may land like a key. I'm not drawn to her. I'm drawn to the chemical relief I got in surviving her. That sentence can sting, but often it frees. What complicates this further is how the narcissist reads your suffering. They don't see the withdrawal as evidence of your healing. They see it as proof that you still belong to them, that the imprint they left is permanent. This isn't always conscious, but it is deeply patterned. The false king believes the bond cannot be broken, because to admit otherwise would mean admitting you had power all along. But what they underestimate is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire, even in the wake of trauma, even through shaky, imperfect distance. As you begin to sleep more deeply, as your body stops flinching at every notification, as your breath returns to your belly instead of your throat, they sense the shift, not always through logic, but through loss of control. That's when the contact changes tone, a nostalgic message, a sudden confession, a new crisis, emotional bait dressed as vulnerability. But it is not always the person that wants to return. It is the system trying to restore itself. There's an image here that may help. In film, there's a familiar character, the dealer who offers both the high and the danger, the one who seems powerful because he controls the supply. But eventually, the customer realizes, this was never intimacy. It was addiction, not to a substance, but to a rhythm. This is the lover-trickster fusion, the one who seduces and sabotages in the same breath, the one who offers connection, but only on terms that keep them at the center. And for a time, it works, because your system still registers their attention as reward. But one day, without announcement, that changes. The same message that once made your heart race now lands differently. It feels hollow, predictable. You no longer wait for their next move with the same tight anticipation. That shift is what they eventually feel. Not your hatred, not your anger, your indifference. And to a narcissist, that is far more threatening. There's no need to rush this. But if you want to track it, there's one embodied signal that may help. Before responding to any outreach, pause. Bring attention to your chest, and ask not with judgment, but with honesty. Is my chest tight or open? Tightness doesn't mean weakness. It means your body still reads them as a threat. Openness doesn't mean you trust them. It means your nervous system is no longer fighting them. You don't need to act on this. Awareness is enough, because the moment your body becomes a more accurate mirror than your mind, the power begins to rebalance, quietly, cleanly, and without the performance they once depended on to feel real. In the early aftermath of leaving a narcissist, your inner world often feels like a weather system they still control. You wake up remembering their mood. You rehearse past conversations while folding clothes. You scan silence for hidden meanings. It can feel as if your nervous system is still orbiting theirs, long after the physical connection is gone. But something begins to shift, often without fanfare, when your sense of stability stops depending on their reaction. This is not detachment born from bitterness. It's the quiet return of your own axis, the part of you that no longer needs to guess their temperature before choosing your own clothing, the part that stops rehearsing how they might respond and starts listening to what you want to say. It may begin with a new routine, more sleep, more sweat, more silence that doesn't ache, less seeking, fewer spikes, not peace all at once, but glimpses of a steadiness that doesn't ask for permission. In Jungian terms, this is individuation. Not the pursuit of perfection, but the slow emergence of the self over the persona you once built to survive. The old persona may have been accommodating, emotionally attuned, hyper-aware of others. It helped you avoid rejection. It helped you keep the peace, but it also cost you your center. Now, in this reconstruction, the self reclaims space. What often surprises men is how foreign this steadiness looks to the one they left behind. Because to a narcissist, the nervous system they once dysregulated now appears alien. You no longer chase, you don't explain, you respond with brevity, if at all. And this absence of emotional chaos can provoke them more than your anger ever did. This is the attachment shift they were never prepared for. You are no longer bonded through volatility, and in biological terms, that means your oxytocin, the neurochemical of trust and connection, is no longer tethered to a threat. Your system begins to associate calm with safety, not intensity. The drama that once felt alive now feels unnecessary, even exhausting. And so, to them, you become unrecognizable, cold, controlled, distant. But what they are seeing isn't a loss of feeling. It's a gain of regulation. You are no longer available for the emotional economy they once thrived in. Here's the part many men miss. Your anger used to feed them. Your arguments gave them a mirror. Your pain kept them central. Because even negative attention is still attention. It confirms their relevance. So when that storm ends, when you speak in clear, brief sentences without pleading or protest, it lands differently. Your neutrality threatens their identity more than your rage ever could. And that neutrality isn't passivity, it's sovereignty. You are no longer performing emotional labor to preserve their illusion. You are no longer negotiating with someone who was never planning to meet you halfway. In this new configuration, you become something unfamiliar. Not a reflection, not a projection, but a person with their own weather system. Their attempts at manipulation begin to fall flat. Not because you've become hard, but because you've become centered. There's a quiet practice here, if you're open to it. Before any interaction, pause for 10 seconds and ask yourself, if I owed them nothing, no guilt, no explanation, no apology, how would I respond? You may not need to speak the answer, but holding it, even silently, begins to reset the dynamic. You're no longer reacting from habit, you're responding from clarity. Over time, your system begins to learn. I don't have to perform tension to prove I care. I don't have to sacrifice my peace to feel connection. And that shift, while invisible on the surface, recalibrates everything. It removes the emotional oxygen from their performance. It renders manipulation ineffective, not because they changed, but because your nervous system no longer registers them as home. In the next movement of this arc, we'll explore what happens when your boundaries become more than words. They become mirrors, and not the flattering kind, the kind that reveals what they can no longer control. In the early stages of your healing, boundaries may feel like fences, rigid, defensive, cold, especially for men who were conditioned to conflate kindness with compliance. But as your center returns, the role of a boundary begins to shift. It becomes less about keeping someone out and more about naming what you are no longer willing to offer for free: your attention, your empathy, your availability to be distorted. What destabilizes the narcissist is not the boundary itself. It's the absence of your old cooperation. You no longer volunteer for exploitation. You no longer smooth things over when they escalate. You no longer explain your no with a long emotional essay that they can use against you later. This isn't a performance of strength. It's the end of a performance. The part of you that needed to be understood, liked, or redeemed by them is no longer holding the microphone. And so, their reaction is not always loud. Sometimes it's theatrical in another way. They may appear wounded, confused, or even deeply apologetic. But pay attention. Often, this is not true reckoning. It's strategy. Because boundaries, to someone who depends on others for self-definition, feel like threats. Not because you're being cruel, but because your refusal interrupts their projection loop. The philosopher Machiavelli once said that power built on spectacle collapses when the audience stops clapping. Jung, in a different voice, would call this a confrontation with the shadow, the moment when someone must face the parts of themselves they've disowned. Your boundary, delivered calmly, is often the first time the narcissist is forced to meet the parts of themselves you used to absorb: their entitlement, their manipulation, their lack of self-regulation. But rather than integrate those parts, they often escalate, not to get clarity, but to escape it. They may attack, distort, or feign injury, not because they're in touch with their wounds, but because they've rehearsed these roles for years. Rage didn't work? Try guilt. Guilt didn't work. Try seduction. It's not personal, it's pattern. There's a cultural echo of this that surfaces in viral stories. Narcissistic parents who faint, collapse, or claim sudden illness the moment they lose control. The body stages a scene. A new crisis emerges just as the child starts to step away. And for many men in romantic entanglements, the parallel is striking. You set a quiet limit. Suddenly, there's a health scare, a confession, a threat to disappear, a claim that you are abandoning someone in pain. But beneath the performance is something more honest. They sense the shift. You're not playing the role anymore. The script isn't working. And for someone who depends on others to make sense of themselves, this is not just frustrating, it's destabilizing. Across survivor communities, a pattern appears. One clear, non-negotiable boundary, held, without drama, without justification. And then, escalation, rage, love bombing, victimhood, cycling. The goal is not reconciliation, it's reinsertion. To re-enter your field of focus, to remind you who they want to be in your eyes. But here's where your clarity becomes a threat, not to your safety, but to their narrative. Because as long as you waver, you're still usable, still shapeable, still part of the story they're writing. But when you hold the boundary, not with cruelty, but with consistency, something different happens. They stop seeing you as supply, and start seeing you as a narrative threat. This is not a revelation they announce. It's one they bury, quickly, under a new distortion, a new partner, a new version of the story. But for a flicker of time, they glimpse it. The man they once sculpted through guilt or praise is no longer available. And that moment, he's no longer usable, is one of their few honest recognitions, even if they never speak it aloud. In the next movement, we explore what they begin to see not just in you, but because of you. Not just who you've become, but what your absence begins to reflect back. A man they can no longer command. When you rebuild your life quietly, something paradoxical begins to happen. You stop transmitting loss. Not because you've erased the past, but because your nervous system is no longer haunted by it. You're sleeping again. Showing up to the gym not out of punishment, but because discipline is starting to feel like devotion. The focus returns. The silence deepens. And even if your world isn't fully stable, it's no longer dictated by their absence. This is the moment when they start to see what they couldn't see before. But not because they've matured, not because they've awakened. What they witness now is not about your presence, but your signal. Something they tried to define has reclaimed itself. Through mutual circles, through the subtle surveillance they never really stopped, through the photos you didn't post for them, through the changes you made without broadcasting. What reaches them is not a polished version of success, but a vibration they no longer control. And when it lands, it does something unfamiliar. It destabilizes their illusion, because what they see is not your revenge, it's your clarity. And clarity, to someone who depends on confusion to hold power, is unbearable. You have moved toward what Jung might call the sovereign archetype. Not flawless, not performative, but rooted, where values weigh more than validation, where your direction doesn't change based on applause. Meanwhile, they remain where they've always been, in the image. The false king, the one who demands a throne but fears a mirror. This is not a moral hierarchy, it's an energetic split. One man has redirected the will to power inward, toward self-mastery. The other remains in the theater, clinging to the audience. And from their vantage point, this shift reads like betrayal. You have defected from their kingdom. You've taken your allegiance back. What's more destabilizing is the reversal. You become what they pretended to be, grounded, visionary, emotionally alive, but not erratic. They once performed depth to secure your devotion. Now you embody it, quietly, without needing anyone to notice. And that embodiment, more than any lecture, dissolves their illusion, not through confrontation, but contrast. This is often when the reach-out returns, not with transparency but curiosity, not to rebuild, but to test. Can they still insert themselves into your new rhythm? Can they become relevant inside your upgrade? It is not reconciliation they seek. It is re-entry. But what they truly encounter in that moment is not resistance. It is something far more threatening. They encounter your peace. A peace that no longer responds to their storm. A presence that no longer reorganizes itself around their mood. And this leads to the final glimpse. The one realization they never wanted but can no longer avoid. You no longer serve their story. That does not mean they'll admit regret or apologize with integrity. What it means is that their attempts to reassert power will be marked not by confidence, but by desperation. Not because you humiliated them, but because you became untouchable, by no longer needing to be touched by them. Many men imagine this as a moment of poetic justice, that one day she'll look back and mourn what she lost. But the deeper truth is less cinematic and more liberating. The real pivot is not whether she sees your value. It's when you stop needing her recognition to confirm it. Her envy, her fascination, her attempts to reclaim you. These are not victories. They're side effects of your individuation, of your return. And in the final arc of this journey, we'll integrate what that recognition reveals. Not about her, but about you. The man you've become. The man she can no longer command. In the end, it was never about whether they would see your worth. The real arc, the one that matters, is whether you would step beyond the illusion they built. Not just leave their presence, but exit their framework. Not just withdraw your energy, but reclaim your authorship. Because until that moment, you were still playing a role in a script they kept revising, one that depended on your confusion, your guilt, your longing for resolution. Their belated recognition is not redemption. It's residue, a delayed flicker of awareness, too late to nourish, too distorted to celebrate. Because what they're seeing now isn't you as you truly are. It's the shape of the absence they can no longer fill, a silhouette of sovereignty, a clarity that refuses to orbit. What they glimpse, if only briefly, is the man they tried to interrupt, focused, grounded, unshaken by the need to be understood. And in that clarity, there is no space for their version of you to survive. You may still feel echoes of the past, not because you're weak, but because your nervous system remembers the architecture of survival. That's not regression, it's residue. The task now is not to erase what happened, but to stand clean in what it revealed. Leaving them wasn't the final act. The turning point came later, when your body began to breathe without their name in your lungs, when your choices stopped needing their shadow for contrast, when your rhythm no longer depended on their pause. It's like stepping out of a smoke-filled hall into cold night air. At first, it stings, the lungs constrict, the brightness feels too sharp. But after a few breaths, you begin to feel something deeper than relief. You feel reality, not the curated version, the actual world, where you no longer have to shrink to be safe, where silence isn't absence, but spaciousness, where clarity isn't earned, it simply is. Their delayed reaction may stir something in you. Curiosity, bitterness, a flicker of temptation. But none of those need to become direction. Because the man you are becoming doesn't derive his next step from their recognition. He draws it from alignment, from habits that hold, from values that don't shake, from the inner voice that no longer negotiates with confusion. That's the shift they were never meant to understand, and that's the man they can no longer command. If this landed with you, you don't need to explain why. Just write one line below, the first moment you knew you were finally moving on. Your sentence might be the mirror another man didn't know he needed.